If someone was to see you on the street and recognize you as the author of Clash of Dynasties, and they asked you who Lawrence Rockefeller was, what would be, like a stop sign length answer you would give them before you guys had to cross the street?
Laurance Rockefeller ran the military-industrial complex for the Rockefeller family. He's probably the least known of all the brothers. He was closest to Nelson. Um, he ran Venture Rockefeller, which put up a lot of initial capital for the Apple computer, startup of Apple Computer. There's a whole list of them, 30 or 40 different entities that they invested in. Rockefellers, in a lot of ways, are considered almost, a lot of people don't notice, but almost the father of Silicon Valley. They were very close with David Packard. I think they run the Packard Foundation, the Rockefeller family does. And they were using that technology for their weapon systems. And that's why we come to this book.
Hmm. Spy capitalism. Was it ITEK?
iTech, I
ITech?
guess I pronounced it, and the CIA,
What's
written by a
this?
man named I picked this came out 2002. I never even cracked it open until this interview here. This is the first sentence of the book. Could he save the company? Question mark. In May 1962, it was a question that must have weighed heavily on Laurance Rockefeller's mind. This is all about the Rockefeller. So here you have these guys, right? Suppose they got out of business. 1913, they declared themselves philanthropists. Suppose they gave all their money away to charity and just were going to spend the rest of their life collecting artwork. And here they are in 1962. Now here they are making spy gear for the CIA. These were more space launched, space based intelligence collection programs.
So let's talk about a little bit there. But what exactly did Lawrence in the in the military industrial complex world? Did he run a certain company?
Well, you got to understand who's the biggest defense contractor. First of all, it's Standard Oil, right? Providing gas fuel for what? Jets, ships, warships, tanks. Let's go on and on, right? And
Yeah.
so, how many other petroleum-based companies are supplying? They're making napalm for the Vietnam War. Okay, you have McDonnell Douglas, which was the third biggest contractor at one time, which eventually merged in with Boeing. That was, I think, Rockefeller was owned like 5% of it outright. It was a major defense contractor.
And Lawrence, what's his role then there?
He was running it.
He was
They
running
run
it.
it as shareholders.
Okay. Okay.
All right, they run it as shareholders, but they appoint people to sit on their board seats, and then they answer back to the family office. Richard Leghorn, never heard of him.
Mm-mm.
He's got 3 pages of credits here, indexing. Look at it all.
Okay.
See, this is what they do. They
Ah,
take it first. They assign. This is their octopus. They assign people to. You can never reach the outer limit of this Rockefeller universe. It's vast. Nobody has enough hours in their life. Nobody has a big enough brain to absorb it all, myself included. But they assign people to their think tanks, to their universities, to their banks, to their oil companies. Goes on and on and on, and then they report back to the family office.
where did Lawrence have? How did he get involved with like go ahead with Eastern TWA, right? Uh,
Yeah, I think they were trying to forge a aviation trust, like they did in oil, an aviation monopoly as they did in oil. But you got to realize who's supplying all the fuel for these airplanes.
they are.
They are. The Rockefellers own Buckeye Pipeline, and Buckeye Pipeline, they ran pipelines to every airport, major airport, and they ran them to these airports and right of ways of abandoned railroad tracks. And that's how they were able to get into these airports. And they fed all our airplanes with fuel. It was a massive industry. So right away, so for them to be in the aviation industry, it was just more of their horizontal and vertical integration. But Lawrence Rockefeller backed Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, who was a World War One ace, right? Eastern Airlines was considered Eastern Airlines was the major airline in the nation at one time. And also, all CIA people were required to fly, book flights on Eastern Airlines.
Is that right?
Yes, I read that, and I think Howard Hunt's book, The Fish is Red.
Wow.
They were required to book, and then in time in the Bay of Pigs, all the people involved in that Bay of Pigs were leaving, flying from Washington down to Miami on Eastern Airline planes back and forth. The planes are full of company called company people, meaning working for the CIA. And of course, David
Very.
Ferry was a pilot for Eastern Airlines, and Eastern Airlines is an Eastern Line building is 10 Rockefeller Plaza, which and good.
So in your mind, somebody like a Ferry is like a Dilworth or something like that. These are proxies for the Rockefellers?
Ferry was way down.
Sure.
Ferry
Sure.
was way down.
But I mean, you always connect the Eastern Airline connection with Ferry when you talk about him.
Absolutely, but I mean, he's way down in this command system, but significant role. But there's levels of power before you get to him. He's taking orders. He's one of their operatives.
Okay.
No doubt about it. He was involved in a lot of suspicious things. This David Ferry, and there's pictures of him with Oswald. So
Oh yeah, well, as we indicated, I think off, not during an interview, but you and I chatting, I see he worked for Standard Oil in Cleveland.
yeah,
Now, as you know, I mean that could be nothing, but nonetheless, the Cleveland connection is interesting.
yeah.
Tell me about what's the significance of Lawrence and Jackson Hole, Wyoming?
Well, it's a massive piece of land that they owned up there, probably originally going way back. It goes back to the father.
So what's the significance then of, I mean, why just because there's a lot of land in Wyoming, or is it more of a
It probably, well, there's oil there, there's gas there, and it has a history of Dick Cheney, of course.
yeah,
And a lot of that land they turned it over to the, national parks and various conservation efforts. And when it was turned over, there was a ceremony. Um, and when the Rockefellers turned the land over, who was at the ceremony to receive the land? Dick Cheney. So, there's a lot of resources out there. Of course, Wyoming, was Teapot Dome scandal. Teapot Dome was there two. One was in Wyoming and one was in California. So you get into the Teapot Dome scandal, you start to get into Wyoming and a lot of history there. So there was, they were pursuing oil, no doubt about it. It's a massive history. Um, Also, Jackson Hole, there was a meeting there with the Clintons.
yes.
Were you familiar with that?
Well, only by reading Clash of Dynasties. Now, real quick, I think I want to talk about that. But I think why don't we also tie in who a former governor of Arkansas was part of this conversation, and that
Yeah,
was that was who, Richard?
Winthrop, Winthrop
Okay,
Rockefeller. And he was elected governor in 68 for one term.
for one
And his
term.
son, yeah,
That was a
I,
fascinating part of Clash of Dynasties was this aspect of Arkansas. I mean, Winthrop, so he was governor at the same time as Nelson was in New
yeah,
York. But why
68.
Arkansas though? Why? It's so
Well,
obscure.
I think it was the Rockefellers like to move into banana republics. Hope I'm not offending anybody from Arkansas, but Arkansas was backwards.
Yeah.
And he moved in it. He took over Gene Pettit Mountain, bulldozed the top down, built a jet runway for his private jet, and he commanded a huge. He was big in agriculture, the Winrock Farms, and very big in beef. And the Rockefellers. That's another significant portion of their business energy is in beef production. They're massively big into it because, first of all, and we've discussed this before, there was a kind of a marriage, a wedding between beef production and oil. Okay, because all these big landholders in Texas, like the King Ranch, Richard Clyburn, and all that, they were striking oil on their land. They made a movie about it called Giant.
Right. Yeah.
And Nelson Rockefeller, very few people knew it, had a private ranch adjacent to the King Ranch in Texas. I know that through reading Joe Persico's book because he used to go there. Joe Persico's book was a speechwriter for Governor Nelson Rockefeller and Vice President Nelson Rockefeller. But the Rockefellers owned the ranch in Brazil, was 1.2 million acres raising beef. And Nelson Rockefeller was business partners with Richard Clyburn in beef production in Brazil and brought them in. So they're huge. So it ties in with their huge beef producing empire. And I think a lot of that too was handled through maybe Citibank. See, when the Rockefeller started taking over these banks had already been in that business. I think Citibank was heavily involved in beef because of the Stillman family. They were a Texas-based family, and the Rockefellers took control of that bank. William Rockefeller, which was John Rockefeller's brothers, two branches to the Rockefeller family, Citibank, and it goes on and on and on. Now you talk about their massive effort into, can you see that?
Accompanying
Agriculture.
mission.
Yeah, you probably can't read. They made the print. That's Nelson Rockefeller's son, Rodman,
Okay.
late son. But this was a huge food producing company.
Was there a Clinton connection though with Arkansas? So Clinton becomes governor, what about maybe 10 years or so after Nelson, or a few
Yeah,
years after, or I'm sorry, after
Winthrop.
Winthrop. Um,
Yeah.
but was there like a mentorship? Do we know of any kind of before he tried to
Well,
get to the White
other
House?
than he went to school on the Fulbright scholarship. Fulbright was a senator from Arkansas.
Hmm.
There was allegations that he was Fulbright's son, but I don't buy it. There's allegations that he was Winthrop Rockefeller's son, but I don't buy that stuff. Without more substance. But with Fulbright, see the Rockefellers, see Hillary Clinton, the same thing. She went to oh boy, but oh boy, Wellesley. Well, Wellesley received the Rockefeller gift. They were given a large sum of money by the Rockefellers. So a lot of this money is scholarship to certain, Hillary started out as Republican, a Rockefeller Republican. And she was picked by, I gotta bring back somebody's name. Senator, she was kind of profiled by Senator, well, it was a Senator Brooks, but yeah, Senator Brooks. He was put in by Nelson Rockefeller to replace Senator Robert Kennedy when Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Governor Rockefeller selected this Brooks to take Kennedy's seat.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
They do that when a senator dies, when a senator dies in office.
Right.
And Brooks kind of recruited Hillary Clinton. And there's a connection to he was chairman of the NFL. I'm trying to refresh my memory on all this stuff.
Oh,
His
yeah.
his son is chairman of the FNL now as we speak.
Oh,
There was
Goodell.
another kid, Goodell. Yeah, not good. Right.
Well,
I'm sorry.
before him, it was Tagliabue.
Tagliabue's daughter married a Rockefeller.
Of
Tagliabue's
course.
daughter married John Rockefeller V.
But that's not who you're talking about.
No, I think he's currently
Well, that's Goodell.
NFL Goodell.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, she had a connection with him too. There was some connection there. Was he a senator or something? Something. I got to refresh my. It's in my book. I'm sorry. So much of this Rockefeller world, but Hillary also. See, these people are they're being selected. They're being profiled. They're being educated by these Rockefeller gifts. And Hillary also, the Children's Defense League, which she was pro bono, didn't work for, pro bono legal work, was founded by the Rockefellers. See?
Wow.
Then she goes to the Rose Law Firm. which is the Rockefellers. So she's all part of this Rockefeller, although she switched parties, but doesn't make any difference. The Rockefellers run both parties and with their money. Yeah, and then they ended up with Laurance at this, and this is very important too, with Laurance, when they went up to this UFO, this Roswell UFO incident, they went to JY Ranch at Jackson Hole.
Slow down.
And that was the right.
Let's focus on that now because we've established Jackson Hole, we've established the Clinton connection with the Rockefellers. Tell me about this meeting in Wyoming about UFOs.
Okay, there's pictures of Hillary Clinton being embraced by Laurance Rockefeller, who's in his 90s, quite aged. Bill was there too, but there's pictures with him embracing her where he's not in the pictures. And well, I guess it's not weird. Most UFOs are owned by the Rockefellers. All right. Now, why? Because of their research in aviation and, well, here it is, space. They were experimenting with aircraft, starting with whenever. Well, the U-2 spy plane, which was, you know, Area 50, was it Area something? Area 53, whatever they go by?
Area 51. Yeah.
Yeah, Area 51, right? These were planes, experimental airplanes that the public didn't know about, other branches of the government didn't know about, and the Rockefeller corporations were developing this stuff, and they didn't want anything. See, then they went in from the U-2 when they did the U-2. Then they went into the Blackbird. They built the Blackbird plane, which was a super fast plane. Then they went into satellite. They went into stealth, building stealth fighters, stealth aircraft. I think General Dynamics was, well, they probably were, but also McDonnell Douglas. They're building stealth aircrafts. They wanted all to be super secret. They don't want you even to know these aircrafts exist. That's what it's about, stealth. We don't want anybody to know anything. So they're operating super secret, and it's possible people died in plane crashes, and they don't want anybody to know how these people died. So there's this hush, hush, hush. Yeah. So anything they're going to tell you, it's all about covering the truth. Okay. Just like all these records are going to come out of Washington and tell us who killed Kennedy. Did it tell us anything? People are just more confused. See, that's what they do. Oh, yeah, you want records? Yeah, we'll give you records. Boom. They can give you 10,000 records. What are you going to do with them? They're not going to tell you the truth. They give you 20,000 files. What are you going to do with them? And they want to cover the truth. They go up there. They make you think we're bringing stuff out, but what they bring is out is very little. The vast amount of truth is going to remain secret. And they make you think, okay, we're coming clean on all this stuff. And they're not coming clean on all this. They don't want this stuff coming out. And it ties in with McDonnell Douglas. It ties in with General Dynamics. It ties in with, it goes on and on and on. That's why it connects to that's why the Rockefellers are part of this, because they were building the aircrafts. They're corporations. Did
Yeah.
I make my?
Yeah. No, so was this during the Clinton administration when they did the tour of JY Ranch in Wyoming?
Yeah, he was
Okay.
president.
Okay.
She
So
was not. She was the first lady.
why does that the embrace between Lawrence and Hillary bother you so much though?
Well, is he trying to win her over? I don't mean romantically. He's it's, to me, like George Bush was basically kissing Bill Clinton's feet after he got defeated and when they ran, right? After Bill Clinton beat him. How many times did Bill Clinton said, "Oh, I became best friends with George Bush after his election"? They're wooing the president. George Bush was part of the plot to kill JFK. He was photographed in Dealey plot. They don't want documents coming out. So he goes there every day kissing it. He's going to this president, kissing his feet and offering services and offering influence. And maybe Clinton doesn't even know his ulterior motive. They don't want this stuff coming out. So he's up there kissing Hillary. So if a Rockefeller comes up to you and, hey, I shook hands with Nelson Rockefeller one time, I
Yes,
don't
you
know if it's in my
mentioned
book. Well, if
you
a
mentioned the
Rockefeller
video
comes
too.
up to you and they're hugging you and kiss, now I won't say as far as kissing, but hugging, and I think that's extremely influential. When you think,
So, wow. Curious, where does President Trump fit in the Rockefeller world?
Trump is not part of the Rockefeller world. He's an anthem to the Rockefeller world. Okay, The one thing, he has his own funds. He's not a senator looking for donors all the time, He's got his own capital. So he's not on his hands and knees to the donations, campaign donations, number one. Now there is some connections. So he's really an anthem to the Rockefellers um, in trade, because NAFTA and China, most favorite nation, were all written by David Rockefeller. And it goes way beyond that. See, David Rockefeller was one of the first to open up the borders to Mexico, to China, to India. It goes on and on and on. Canada goes on and on and on. Primarily was to get cheaper labor, okay, and to get rid of regulations. So now they can, dump whatever they want. They can dump it they're in another country. They can dump all their byproduct wherever they want. They could put smokestacks and put it up just like they did when these titans of industry were building their industrial empires. They just paid low wages and polluted the entire environment. So now they go into countries where they don't have to pay any wages. And then they bring these products back at pennies cost. And then they eliminate American labor. I believe a lot of the reason why JFK was killed was because of Rockefeller's war against organized labor, and they had committed murders and stuff, and they didn't want this stuff coming back. One of the reasons. So now this is all eliminated. Okay, but Trump, there's two ties to Trump and the Rockefeller. I would say the circles of great wealth and power will intersect ultimately. There's two sides to Trump that interesting connected to JFK assassination. One, who bought Eastern Airlines? Donald Trump. Also, the Hilton Hotel in New Jersey. The Hilton Hotel in New Jersey, when they opened up the casino, they would not let them open up the casino, the state of New Jersey, because they were involved with a man named Sidney Korshak.
Oh yeah, the
Okay, I
lawyer.
got a book.
Yeah.
He was the mob lawyer.
Yep.
He was the guy Bobby Kennedy went after. He was the first person that Bobby Kennedy called to the
McClellan.
racketeering committees. I
McClellan
call it
years. Yeah.
Kennedy hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the McClellan committees. Sidney Korshak was the first guy,
Wow.
and Sidney Korshak, the Hilton Hotel was used as Sidney Korshak. Henry Crown was involved in the Hilton Hotel. Well, Conrad Hilton, of course, but Henry Crown became a partner in that hotel chain, which goes back to the Flamingo Hotel. But we don't have time to cover it. It's so vast and massive. So because Sidney Korshak was representing the Hilton Hotel to get their liquor license, the state of New Jersey did their job and said, no, you're not getting a license. So I don't know what happened, all the history there, what happened. But then Trump came in. I can't remember all the history. I think they did buy that hotel. Didn't Trump buy it? And they changed the name to the Trump something. I think Trump changed the name. Yeah, I think he did take it over.
Was
And they
that Taj
changed.
Mahal?
Yeah, I gotta be careful. I gotta be
Yeah.
careful. So much the Rockefeller world is so. But Trump went in there and took that hotel over. I'm pretty sure of it. But that part about Sidney Korshak, uh, he was the guy that Bobby Kennedy was primarily pursuing. And of course, he was Henry Crown's lawyer. Henry Crown was the biggest stockholder in General Dynamics. It goes on and on and on and on. But it all comes back to killing Kennedy. And also, there's another scandal that involved Nelson Rockefeller administration. It involved Sidney Korshak's brother,
Hmm.
Marshall Korshak, who for a period of time was treasurer for the city of Chicago. I mean, this is like the gangsters giving the gangsters the key to the public treasury, right? Marshall Korshak, when Playboy wanted to open up a Playboy club in New York City, well, it's Nelson Rockefeller. It's his guys. People in his administration, they started shaking Hugh Hefner down. They wanted $100,000 before they would give him the license, open up and Marshall Korshak, Sidney Korshak's brother, was one of the go-betweens. And Hugh Hefner came to New York City. I don't know if he bought a satchel of cash, but he negotiated the deal in person. Yeah. So these connections go on and on and on.
Wow. Yeah. So when you're talking like Meyer Lansky and Horshack or Lucky
Yeah,
Luciano, I mean,
yeah.
uh is there was there an organized crime kind of like I never thought of the Rockefellers in terms of organized crime, but
They are. They're the overlords of it all. We could go on and on forever, but um, because money, anytime you have a illegal industry, quasi-legal or under the table industry, there's two avenues to it. One is the contraband, could be drugs, could be gambling, could be prohibition, alcohol, but there's another prong to it all, and that's cash. So there's a whole industry that provides the product, the end product. There's another industry that takes the cash and goes back, eventually got to go back to the end supplier, but then eventually moves up to pockets of international bankers. That's where the Rockefellers come in.
yeah,
And,
wow,
I was just watching on YouTube, Afghanistan is producing more opium poppies than ever in their history before. The Taliban try to stamp it out. They're producing more opium. So there's a worldwide empire making poppies and converting into heroin and moving it all around the world. It's a vast empire, and it traces back to certain people like the John Kerry. I believe they're still involved in it. I gotta be careful what I say. John Kerry probably would be one of the last people who would really know the truth about the Kennedy assassination.
really.
And not that he's indictable, but this is an
Well,
opium cartel. They were involved in selling opium to China when China was trying to outlaw opium. There was a chapter there when the Chinese government actually took the opium. This involved the British East India Company, but they were all involved in it. The Forbes family, John Kerry, his fifth cousin was Michael Payne, who gave Oswald a safe house on the eve of the Kennedy. So on the eve of the Kennedy assassination, he gave Oswald a safe house. Supposedly there was a rifle stored there. Okay, so and right, the Forbes, but his Michael Payne is the Forbes. All right. They were part of the world opium cartels, smuggling opium into China when China was trying to stop it. That's how they made their fortunes. And the Roosevelt family was part of it. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Delanos. Delano, Warren Delano. I don't know if I'm going off the track here, but when
it's
you
okay.
say who's in charge of these things,
Yeah.
a lot of these people like Luciano, they were the street level people. But on the high level, internationally, it's involved with the Rockefellers and these people of great wealth and connections and power internationally. They're the overlords of it all. The Meyer Lansky and the Charles Lucianos, they're pretty much the street level people, or they run an area or run a neighborhood because this drug has to be distributed and money has to be collected. But there's a higher level. That's like there's a higher level, like in the Pentagon, you have levels. So yeah, that's how they are. Got to be involved in it.
What was the point then of the Vietnam War, in your opinion?
Well,
What was the point of the Vietnam War, in your opinion? Was it the production and the movement of drugs?
well, I never really, the Vietnam War had also a lot of petroleum implications too because of offshore drilling. One of the richest oil is in Brunei. You know, China Sea is believed to be South China Sea is believed to be one of the untapped biggest reserves of oil in the world. So there's a big oil factor in all that. Say petroleum factor. Say because according to the UN rules, which the Rockefellers run the UN, they can drill two and a half 250 miles offshore. When you talk natural extracting resources, shipping is 7 miles, but but drilling oil, you could go out 250 miles. So if there's an island 200 miles out there and Vietnam owns it, they can go out another 250 miles. So they can go out 500 miles. That's a massive circumference in the South China Sea. Oh, places they can potentially drill for oil. It's relatively untapped. And by the way, Obama's father was one of the guys. Well, his stepfather works for one of the big companies. He was I'm going to try to made maps for, well, I don't know,
Cartographer.
he was a cartographer for, I think, ExxonMobil or something. You know, they never wanted Nelson Rockefeller to be it. The family never wanted him to be in politics because these were dastardly people. And they knew if Nelson got into politics, he would expose the family to things that, you know, would start bringing up things. And that's one of the reasons, I believe, when he was vice president, he dropped off the ticket because there was 3 articles published when he became vice president that connected him to Lee Harvey Oswald. And they came around and said 3 articles.
Remember?
International House, story of International House, International Trademark. Who worked on it?
Clay
Well,
Shaw.
Clay Shaw. Clay Shaw was probably giving orders to David Ferrie. Okay. Now that was in 74. Who was vice president?
Nelson.
Okay. Okay. Well, they mentioned Hale Boggs.
Yeah, I mean,
Hale Boggs. Hale Boggs was on the Warren Commission. He was their first secretary. Who worked for this? Who ran this? Clay Shaw. He was indicted for conspiracy to kill JFK.
but
His
he was acquitted, Richard.
Well, I can't believe Jim Garrison woke up one day and said, I want to destroy a man. We could go on and on about that trial, too. Here's another one, another JFK slang. This was in the Washington Star, written by a man named Norman Kemper. And this goes into the story of William George Godet. Are you familiar with that story?
Oh, the William Godet, he
This was
was behind
this was
Oswald.
in
Behind,
1976. He
yeah,
might have just gotten out by then.
he was a former
Yeah, he was
CIA
president. He was vice
informant or
president.
something, right?
Well, he crossed into Mexico
Yeah,
at the same time with Oswald. He
right.
was CIA. But this article claims he worked for Nelson Rockefeller one time, and it says Nelson Rockefeller was vice president.
Okay, but is this
Okay.
you know how when someone's in office, there's all of these books and articles that come out about whoever's in office to kind of try to smear this person. So how much of this is smearing like
Yeah,
Nelson?
but listen, here's 2 guys. We have George Marinsheeds.
Yeah.
Okay, here George Marinsheeds was Oswald's closest associate in the days and weeks leading up to the JFK assassination. And also, Nelson Rockefeller had announced his candidacy probably a month before the JFK assassination. He announced to run for the White House. Okay, so he's not a man with a motive to kill JFK. Now, here's another guy here. William George Godet worked for Nelson Rockefeller one time. Don't forget, CIA was really formed out of what? Nelson Rockefeller's wartime operation.
Yeah, the
These
coordinator,
guys were all working.
Mr. Coordinator.
The story is he crossed the border into Mexico with Oswald, but there's a list. Okay, there was a list of people. They were one right after the other. I forget
Yes.
what order. What
Yeah,
their
I think
name?
O'Day was behind him.
Yeah. Okay. And then their names were redacted. I think when the Warren Commission got the names were redacted. The names were redacted. But the House Assassination Committee got the names out. See, because the Warren Commission didn't want to go anywhere. They didn't want to bring anybody in beyond Oswald. They were
Right.
going to make up a cover story. Oswald did it. So how is this smearing people? 2 people connect with Oswald. Oh, okay. What are they going to say? It's another coincidence? Well, we could go on and on and on. And then, of course, the makeup of the war. But we could go on and on and on. Here's another article, 1970. When is this article? 1976. The JFK hit the Rockefeller-Buckley connection. He's vice president of the United States, and they're accusing him of killing JFK. That's why he got off the ticket. Because if he had become president, it would have been an avalanche of stuff coming out.
Is this William
And
Buckley?
yeah, his father was in the oil business. And George Marinsky worked for him. How could you say this is coincidental? Then we get into the story of Henry Crown and Jack Ruby. Those people weren't in the oil business.
Well,
They were in,
tell us that story real quick.
it's too long.
What's
Okay,
Ruby though? What do you mean? I know
here's
obviously.
what happened. There was a murder in Chicago. I'm going to say, then again, I'm going to say 1946. A man named James Reagan was gunned down on the streets in
Yes.
Chicago. He identified his killers. One was David Yares.
Yes. Supposedly.
Claimed was
Was he
Well, how would he not know? How would
was
he?
he
How would he be
convicted?
mistaken? Yeah, but witnesses turned up dead.
Okay.
Witnesses were murdered.
Okay.
That's how they got off. and Lenny Patrick. Both were known to be
Right.
best pals, best hoodlum gangster, Chicago gangster pals of Jack Ruby.
Yeah.
See, now what Ruby had a role in it? He probably did. They were
He was
their
still in Chicago at
outfit.
that point.
New York City had Murder Incorporated, right?
Right. Well,
You mentioned
landscape.
some of the names.
Landscape.
Chicago had the outfit.
Right.
Now, according to Drew Pearson, economist, he
Yeah.
claims that Henry Crown, Walter Annenberg, and people connected with the Hilton Hotel were behind the murder of James Reagan, gave the order to kill JFK. All right. So, and also the Hilton Hotel in 1963, they built their flagship hotel, and Rockefeller's actually built it in Rockefeller Center. And then Hilton took over the Flamingo and Conrad Hilton. But here's the thing. Henry Crown was the chief owner of General Dynamics. Okay. General Dynamics built a most sophisticated weapon system, but it was the Rockefeller, General Electric, built the propulsion systems in New York State at Schenectady, the G plant Schenectady in New York, and the whole back area. It's right up against the Hudson River, and not the Hudson, but the Mohawk River. It's all fenced off because they polluted the whole area. It's super radioactive back there. God, how much is leaked into the river. Okay. And Lockheed made the Polaris missile. Okay, then again, we talk about the U-2 spy plane, we talk about Area 1, we talk about Roswell incidents. It all ties back. The $100,000 suitcase, there was a check that General Dynamics signed to pay a vendor. It went to New Orleans. It was converted into cash, put in a suitcase. Okay. It is believed. I could go on and on and on. There's two testimonies that corroborate the story. One was on the front page of every newspaper. The other came out 12 years later, that the money was used to pay for the assassins to kill JFK. Okay, I believe the check still exists. It's in the records in Washington. The McClellan Committee has it because they were investigating Bobby Baker. Yeah, before. Actually, when he sat down and talked to McClellan, he handed McClellan the check signed by General Dynamics, canceled check for $100,000. That moment, totally coincidental, JFK was assassinated in Dallas.
Okay.
And
Oh, so is the
but
McClellan
here's the thing:
hearing
Jack
going on at the
Ruby
same
picked up
time?
what? What?
W
When?
Walk me through this here. So when is this? What is this $100,000? When is this? Give me a time frame.
Summer 1963.
Okay.
Okay. It was in 1964. It started in 63. The day Kennedy was assassinated, all the investigation got put on hold. It was an investigation of Bobby Baker.
That's right.
A few months
Okay.
later, it was on the front page of every newspaper about this $100,000 suitcase stuffed with $100,000, summer of 63, that Bobby Kennedy showed to a man named Don Reynolds, that the money came from General Dynamics, supposedly going to Lyndon Johnson, but who knows all the details. It was $100,000 that went to that Bobby Baker showed him, opened up a suitcase. That's $1 million today. General Dynamics in 63 is where Rockefeller's on it. It's run by a man named Roger Lewis, who was a former undersecretary of the Air Force. All right. And here's the thing 12 years later, it was a testimony of Robert Easterling.
Well, he was
Okay.
supposedly a witness who knew something about the assassination, correct?
Well, supposedly involved in it. Oswald's chauffeur. Okay. He claims that he put the suitcase in the money in the suitcase. They got the cash. They converted the check to a series of grocery stores. I don't know how they did it. He got the money, and two people came to pick up the money. The one guy he knew well was Clay Shaw. The other guy he never seen before, but he would soon learn his name was Jack Ruby. And Jack Ruby was going to take the money back to Dallas. So there was another guy in the office. He says, Jack, aren't you afraid carrying all the money? He took out his pistol, probably the same pistol he shot Oswald. He said, oh, I'm not afraid. I got my little heater here, which is a gangster term for a pistol. And they took it back to Dallas to pay the assassins to kill JFK. That's from General Dynamics. See, here's the thing. This is why Jack Ruby involved himself. Jack Ruby and Henry Crown were forced to take place in this killing. Why? Because Bobby Kennedy was investigating these past crimes of the death of James Reagan, and they had to act to kill Bobby, or they would have went to the gallows. That's why they participated in these crimes. That's why they got involved in the crimes. That's why they got involved in this conspiracy. They had to stop Bobby Kennedy as Attorney General investigating these crimes
And they
that they
did.
had, the killing of James Reagan, which was several years before.
Now, who was he though? Why was he
James
killed?
Reagan.
Yeah.
James Reagan had a huge history. He was a gangster in Chicago, an Irish gangster in Chicago. He has a huge history. There's a book this thick written on him. I haven't read it, but he was running. He was running the wire service,
Okay.
right?
For
Which was an
races?
under the tape horse race,
Yeah.
off track betting. It was quasi illegal, maybe even quasi illegal. It was backroom stuff,
Okay.
and they were running this race wire. And um, Annenberg ran the Daily Racing Forum. Are you familiar with that?
Oh
The
yeah.
Daily Racing
Oh
Forum.
yeah.
It was a huge publication.
Still is.
Batters years ago, they would go like this. They would fold it and put it in their back pocket. I still
Yeah.
remember those bettors walking around with that thing in their back. It was a Bible to the bettors, and they
Right.
ran that. Yeah, and
My father-in-law used
so
to. Yeah.
yeah. Well, these gangsters, um, James Reagan, got put in charge of this. I think even by FDR was behind him, and it was some kind of like a consortium. This James Reagan paid one of the biggest phone bills in the country. That's how much betting was going on. And I'm not exaggerating by much. But see, FDR died. He was his big protector. And I believe it was almost like the first witness protection program. But when FDR died, these gangsters went after him. And he was a songbird like Joe Valachi. He wrote a 96-page dissertation telling all about the underworld. He turned it over to the Justice Department, FBI, and they says, "Oh, we lost that." See, that's why they went after him. They didn't want a songbird. You saw Joe Valachi.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why we know so much about Murder Incorporated and murders, because Joe Valachi was part of these gangs. Okay, so they were trying to silence these people and partly taking over trying to take over the wire service and run it their way. Uh,
Okay. Okay. All right.
and Robert, yeah. And another thing that it's in my book, Robert um, Erstingling also worked for Standard Oil. He
Wow.
worked he worked at the Standard Oil refinery in Baton Rouge, which is right in eyesight of the house, the state house, the Huey Long Man Memorial, the place where Huey Long was assassinated, who, by the way, was outspoken anti-Rockefeller. Well, South didn't like Rockefeller. It's another story.
Well,
And he worked there. And he was brought in to drive Oswald. And he claimed one day, a man named, and I believe this is the guy who shot Tippit. I didn't say it in my book, but my next book, I'm going to reveal it. Was a man named Sergio Arcata Smith, shot Tippit. But Sergio Arcata Smith, they didn't even mention his name in the book, but I know who it was. He fired it. You know who I know? You know how I know was Sergio Arcata Smith? Because of George Goodday.
William. Yeah.
Guy, because George Goodday says, he tried to brush the whole thing up. It was all, but he says, "You want to know the story? Talk to Sergio Arcata Smith," because he was always with Oswald. He was described as he was a Cuban.
No, he wasn't always with Oswald. I thought he was buddies with Ferry. Right? Wasn't Arcega Smith like buddies with Ferry down in New Orleans? They were running the Cuban Revolutionary Front, right? And
Yeah,
yeah,
but then he came back to the United States. They all left it. They all left
yeah,
Cuba. When
yeah,
Castro took over,
yeah.
and then he was, according to George Goodday, and this is the weeks leading up to the JFK assassination. He was always with Oswald. He would he was assigned to drive Oswald. Okay, but he claims that George Goodday, not George Goodday,
Smith.
Sergio Cato Smith, who I believe shot Tippit, fired the Mannlicher Caicano into a water barrel. Okay, Oswald Mannlicher. They got the bullet, and he said, "This is going to be in history." Okay, this is going to be remembered in history. Okay, it was pristine, nothing, almost no, it didn't hit bone and flesh. There was no bending to it. Right, it's fired in the water barrel. Now, I believe, according to Officer Craig, if you remember Craig, he was
Yeah,
also
Roger
murdered.
Craig.
Right.
He was persona
He
non grata.
claimed he claimed it was not a Manacacano. I told you a story
The
about my
Mauser.
uncle. He claims the Mauser. I told you a story about my uncle having the Mauser and displaying it. Right. Then they changed. Oh, it's a Manac. It's a Mauser. It's a
Wait,
Man. It's a
I'm sorry, your
Manacacano.
uncle?
My uncle had a Mauser from World War II, and he picked up the battlefield in World War II. We were watching, everybody was gathered around TV sets and radios watching the news, right? Oswald now is the center of the world stage. They want to see this guy, right?
Yeah.
Little did we know. And they said it was a Mauser.
Yeah.
So my uncle had one from World War II, and he's showing everybody, safely. And it had a double trigger. One was a safety trigger, and the other one was what you call a hair trigger, which was known for accurate shooting. He found that he picked it up the battlefield in World War II.
Wow.
And but then they changed the news,
Yeah.
just like
The story
David
change.
Ferry. When we got a guy from New Orleans, and they go, oh no, we released him. Oh no, he's cleared. See, I
Yeah.
told you that story. This is what got me interested. I wanted to satisfy my curiosity. But where was I now?
Well, hang on. Hey, so
Look
Easterling,
at case. So wait, so he saw Craig's. So Sheriff Deputy Craig,
right?
he claims he saw the Rambler Nash automobile, it was green. He saw a driver, dark, heavy man, and he's looking like he heard a whistle. He turned, he looking, this guy behind the wheel of the car. He sees a man who looks like Oswald get in the car. They drive off.
Right.
He tried to get to him. He says, well, he goes, that's funny because you know why? Everybody's running to the grassy knoll,
Right.
but these guys are running away. He was a good cop, right? He knew what to do.
Well,
He was smart. So then they go towards Parkland Hospital. Okay, I believe in my book that they took that bullet and dropped it on the stretcher.
who's
Because the
they?
bullet found Sergeant K. Smith. Remember, he fired into the water barrel.
Well, how do you know that?
It's got to be him.
What, no,
Heavy,
no, no.
a
How do you
heavy
know
set.
this? What's the story about the water barrel? Where are you coming up with that?
It's in a book written, published in 1984. I have a copy of it.
This is Henry Hurt's book, Reasonable Doubt.
Great book.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
He interviewed Robert Easterling.
Correct. Correct. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
That's where the testimony comes from.
Okay.
So I said, well, they must, because they drove towards Parkland Hospital, because nobody knew what was going on with the president. They don't know if he was dead or alive yet, I mean, there was a lot of blood splatter. So I believe they dropped it on the stretcher because they found the bullet on a stretcher in the hallway. But listen, this is chaos. People are mingling. Nobody's watching. Nobody's thinking there's a plot here, right? So they, but if you know, about a year ago,
Paul
this
Landis.
FBI, and he said, it was found on the back of the seat of the limousine.
Do you believe that?
No, I believe it was found. Yes. So Sergeant K. Smith must have laid the bullet right on the seat, and he brought it in and put it on the stretcher.
Paul
Now I didn't
Landis
know that
found
one,
it.
Lloyd. Yeah.
So
See
you
how it
believe
started.
Paul Landis' story after 60 years at that point?
Yes, absolutely. Because Sergio Arcade Smith, I believe it's him. There's no doubt in my mind that he took that bullet. They fired in the water gun. They fired that bullet in the water barrel, and he placed it on the seat of the car, of the limousine, in the back seat of the limousine, and apparently the top of the seat.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that's when they were claiming bullets were falling out of people's body, and they were undercharged, and they keep going up and more and more. It was a planted evidence. They were planting evidence.
Smith was able to walk up to the presidential limousine
Well,
outside
this is
Parkland
within
Hospital.
He's right behind.
Chaos.
He's right behind the car. I mean, they're zooming right behind the car. He's only probably president. Okay, he's in the emergency room. They got him out of the car. So who's thinking there's chaos going on here? Who's thinking about there's going to be a conspiracy? Somebody's going to plot a book.
Yeah.
It's confusion. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So it can.
Is Ruby at Parkland Hospital in your theory?
Yes, there's a picture of him. Yeah, because he tagged. That's how I started my past too. I find stuff every day. YouTube, there's some great videos out there. Even if you don't believe them all, a lot of these researchers, they come up with key pieces, right? Then again, Ruby was at Dealey Plaza. They photographed him. So wasn't George Bush. Ruby had a snazzy suit on, gangster suit. Well, like I say, nobody really knew what happened. Is he dead or alive? What's going on? So Ruby, there was a reporter there, Scripps Howard reporter. His name was Seth Cantor.
Yeah.
You familiar? Well, he wrote a great book. The Truth to the Rockefellers is by way of Jack Ruby. Okay. Now, I read that book. I said, wait a minute. This is not a question of the FBI or the authorities being dumb. It's a question of cover-up. He had all kinds of phone conversations with members of the Teamsters.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, and FBI knew all about this because they were Barney Baker. Well, he's in Bobby's book.
Yeah. Well,
Everybody knows Bobby's book. He mentioned Barney Baker, worked for Jimmy Hoffa. He got out of prison. The FBI put cuffs on him. How would they not know these people? With motives, violent people with motives to kill. How would the FBI know? So it's a cover up. But anyways, that was the beginning of my long trip. But he said Ruby came up behind and pulled his jacket. He was a script. He heard the shots. He was in the motorcade. Seth Cantor. He turned around Jack Ruby. Well, Jack Ruby was a man about town. Okay.
yeah.
He was a reporter. So they cross paths here and there. All right. So Ruby says to him, geez, you think I ought to shut down my, well, whatever he used the word he used, bar or whatever, nightclub was, well, actually it was a stripper club.
Well, Ruby
And so
supposedly,
when he went to the Warren Commission, they wouldn't believe his story.
yeah, it's odd
Why
testimony.
would you not believe his story?
Now,
Because Ruby, go ahead.
well, yeah, there's so much here. We should probably wrap it up, but hasn't Easterling been discredited though, Richard?
No way. Well, listen, there's a whole army of people trying to cover for the Rockefellers and discredit the truth. I would not discredit him at all. And then another thing he said, he called the FBI and even the Kennedy assassination. He called the New Orleans FBI. They transferred him to Washington. The guy he was talking to in Washington, I don't know if you remember his name, knew Robert Eastling. He had his name. He had to make him license plate number of his car. He couldn't believe it. And they said to him, well, we know the whole story. We're going to catch these guys red-handed. Well, they did. Okay. So if you know, Earl Warren wrote an open letter. And when the Warren Commission cover-up was signed, he wrote an open letter to Hoover saying that the FBI had done its job, the president would be alive today. And he recommended or maybe ordered Hoover to discipline these agents. Well, it was 18 or something. Well, doesn't that fit into what Easterling is saying? That they knew the whole story? And one more thing. Oswald, a few days before the assassination, went to the FBI office and left a handwritten note. He was looking for James Hosty,
Hosting the
who, by the
FBI
way,
agent in
is
Dallas.
mentioned in these documents with George Marinci long before Kennedy was assassinated. He's talking about James Hosting, right? You went to see James Hosting. So he wrote a handwritten note. We don't know what it said. Well, I think the day after Oswald was shot, assassinated himself, the FBI took the note. Now, why would you destroy evidence, okay, they say crime of the century? Well, it's beyond that because an assassination of an American president is a frontal assault on the American Constitution and people, and then you tear up evidence. You know why? Because Oswald was tipping off the FBI. He was tipping off where, when, and what. And that fits into what Easterling is saying. That fits into what Earl Warren's open letter to J. Edgar Hoover. He can't be discredited in my opinion.
Richard, we're
So
gonna have to stop it here.
how this stuff all lines up?
Yeah, it's fascinating. We'll pick it up again, okay?
All right, you're gonna have to do a lot of editing.